Okay, today is Thursday, June 15th, 2017. So, yesterday there was the U.S. Central Bank, that's the Federal Reserve, and their announcement about money supply, the stuff that we got to pay for because they're basically ransomware on the country, and they hold up every country for taxes, for our taxes. That's where your income tax comes from, and that's where your Civil War, War of 1812, and all of your presidential assassinations and assassination attempts come from. Your world wars, Vietnam, Korea, and every genocide under communism and socialism, the starvation, the abortionism, destruction of families, fake news, fake mainstream news, anti-national education in the colleges and the elementary schools, the high schools, you name it. And why? Because they make so much money, and they also operate like a mafia. So you can buy what you want. You always have more growth, right? You understand businesses, they always grow. And you understand mafias. They don't just buy what they want, they inflict threats. They eliminate competition. So, and what's the point? It's kind of obvious. Anyway, so they made their statement yesterday, and it said that there would be a 0.25% interest rate increase, which means that they reduce their bond holdings, which reduces money supply. And they are saying that they will reduce the bonds on their books at about, I believe, $10 billion a month. So at $10 billion a month, they will liquidate U.S. Treasuries and I guess the mortgage securities they've got. And what that does is that drops a lot of money supply in the economy. So a lot of people don't understand how that works. In fact, I think probably something like 99.99% of the people in the world or more do not understand money supply. And basically what that is that you got to have money. It's kind of like the lubrication in a engine. If you eliminate the viscous liquidity in between all of those metal parts that are moving so fast, they will overheat and it'll seize up. And that's what happens because essentially the economy has a lot of moving parts. It's people trading, right? And it's a very exponential sociological expression of the masses. And if you if all you can do is barter, okay, then what happens is that say you run a retail store, right? And people are working at these places and they get paid with the things that they make, okay? So the bosses say, okay, well, you know, you're using my supplies, my real estate. You are working, though. I'll give you some of these things. Well, if you make something like, I mean, you know, you can think of all the things that people make out there, and you make something that you can't sell, And then you bring it to the store where you got to buy something from the guy that's just a retailer, right? He's the broker between, the retail customers and the wholesale makers or distributors. And you bring whatever it is there, right? So then that retailer would have to stock up all of these materials that all of these workers are bringing in from their workplaces and so forth, and everything else in between, because there's a lot of private exchange, for instance, on classifieds and Craigslist and every other kind of exchange here and there, trades, and so they would have an enormous complex just for storing everything that everybody brought in. And so it would be worse than a pawn shop, right? Because big pawn shops actually have a lot of storage because of that reason. But they're actually more liquid in that they don't have as many problems as that. But the thing is, though, is that, in fact, no, that's about the same. But they turn down 90% of everybody that comes in. So, and so a retailer is not going to turn down. Retailers don't turn down anybody, right? So if you go into the retailer, they don't say, no, we don't need your thingamajigger, because now the thing is, though, and as a matter of fact, this proves my point. In a pawn shop, they will decline 90% of people that come in there. The number one reason is because they can't get rid of whatever it is that you're bringing in or that folks are bringing in. So if they can't get rid of it, it means that they can't find a buyer. And also there's the fact that you can't find, they can't agree on a price. Okay. And so a lot of people go home with whatever it was, but that's how, if the entire economy worked like that, okay, then you would have this exponential seizure. Okay. But since it doesn't work like that, because you don't have to go find a buyer, you just have to take the money and you can invest or purchase whatever it is that you want at, when you're in business. And that's what they mean by liquidity. Illiquidity is the problem that the pawn shop owner has when he can't get rid of something, and get his investment back out of it, right? Imagine the problems in just one store exactly like that, but it everywhere in the world, see? And so that's the intrinsic value of money right there, is that one factor, that phenomenon of liquidity. It just means that the information on your currency represents an amount of value, right, that is recognized and approved of by others out there, right, to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. The currency, that information on that currency is worth anything. It's worth anything, right? So, and then of course you have to have more of it, more of the information it represents, in order to be valued more value in anything else, including people's talents, their knowledge. Okay. And really what it is just everybody's exchanging their time and their energy on things. And then you have the interest in rarity, or the interest in demand, the demand interest. Those affect prices as well, which things like socialism do not take into account. Barterism is basically the reason why there is currency, And the central banks, ever since the Bank of England in London, it opened up in 1694. Ever since then, they've been capitalizing on this one intrinsic factor, and there is no telling. See, the thing is that there is no telling what their actual value is in those organizations. Their actual value in those organizations is that they can have anybody killed that they want. They can throw nations into wars. They can have genocides. They can poison. They can do anything they want. They can change the mass paradigms of countries because you're competing with them. They're a business, but they're mafia. And it's a global thing. There's one in every country, almost, virtually. Just a few countries don't have these yet. But they're working on them. In fact, they assassinate their leaders. Two of them was Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. Okay? They got them. Now, were they innocent guys? Not necessarily. But they were easy prey. And those countries didn't have central banks. And I believe they are getting those now. So, anyway, the thing is, though, is that people used to assume that all of these currencies were backed by gold. And that originates from when gold was the back of all currencies. So basically there would be these guys that would be money changers. And they would also be jewelry workers. They would actually mint the coins and make the jewelry out of gold and, whatever you use gold for. And so they'd have these vaults. And what they would do is they would hold accounts, just like you hold an account with the bank. And so you would go in there and you'd say, okay, write me out a note for this amount of money, okay, and then deduct that from my gold account. So they would write that out, then they would go to their ledgers and deduct that amount from such and such person's gold account in the vault. Then they would take that note, they would go to the store or whoever, give that note to that person, take their purchase, and then that seller would take the note and go back to the vault and then say, put this on my account. And so the gold didn't move anywhere in there, but who owns how much changed on the ledgers. Okay. And then the thing is, though, is that barely 10% of the gold would ever leave the place at most at one time. Supposedly. It could be less than that. It could be barely anything. But basically the point is that they could write these IOUs to anybody. Say you want to borrow money, right? So they could use those IOUs and invest in whatever. Now that would be great if I were a goldsmith with a big gold vault and everybody's gold is in there plus my own, and I could write 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times the value. I could even change the value. I mean, it's basically up to me, and I could write myself these things. I could go to let's say a stock exchange and pick up the bonds and pick up all the stocks or whatever, and then just constantly profit on this money that I made up out of thin air. And so that's exactly what they had been doing for thousands of years. It was a problem in ancient Rome. It was a problem in Jerusalem. This is what Jesus scoffed about. This has been a problem for ages. And the thing is, though, is the difference in the central bank wars is that they came up with the Ponzi scheme on top of it, and then they combined it with the royal institution. For 400 years, England was very prosperous because they used a tally stick currency. And so these tally sticks, they had notches in them, and the king would basically, for the king, they would split them in half, and then that one half was a receipt. And the king would say, okay, you guys got to pay, you got to pay taxes in these tally sticks, not in gold, not in paper or whatever. It's got to be tally sticks. And so they were very prosperous. Everything was working just fine. It's just information that you need. You just got to have everybody say, okay, yeah, that'll work for me. And then the thing is that they know that when they go and turn around with that currency, it could be yak doo-doo. It doesn't matter. Or seashells. As long as you turn around and it's worth whatever squat or is it moral to somebody else, it has intrinsic value. That's all. It's just the acceptance of it. It's like, to a satanic cult, the cross means, it means the bad thing. So it doesn't have that value. But to the Christendom empire, which is 3 billion people now, it does mean something. And it means that you're accepted on that, and you're assumed to be of such and such worth until you prove otherwise. But and so in the Islamo empires, that the cross would mean that you're a traitor, you're a dissenter, and you could be killed and definitely narrowed out of business and so on and so forth. But in a Buddhist culture, it's not going to be a problem. But what is it? It's information. It's what you think. It's based on what you think. The cross is just a representation. It's a piece of information. But that information is currency when it becomes interchangeable between people. And so it's the same with currencies. You've got your tally sticks in England that lasted 400 years. I think that's the best example of this kind of thing. And they did very well. They were profoundly creative, economic. They had all kinds of things going on, and it wasn't worse than ever. It was better than ever. Those were the height of the times in those days. It wasn't a boondoggle, and because the information was acceptable. You understand? That's all that matters. Now, when the central bank got into the Bank of England, basically what they did was they got the government, which is the kingdom, the monarchy. Okay. They got the government to burn all of the tally sticks. And I forget how many there were. There were a ton. And they burnt them secretly in the basement underneath the parliament. And I believe this was sometime in 1600s. And basically the fire was so bad and so hot that it wound up catching part of the parliament on fire. So they didn't get away with it innocently. But the thing is, though, is that the money changers got them to get rid of it and the money changers never liked the tally sticks because they wanted to dominate money because there's just so much profit in it. I mean, can you imagine if you had some kind of product that was very profitable and then you're always competing with other people that are saying, no, this is not going to work for us. And so you're not able to sell it to everybody. But what were they doing? They were just wanting to be able to sell fake paper. That's it. And I told you about the problem with them over thousands of years. You know, they hurt empires, but so they finally got their way in England. They burnt all the tally sticks, and then they opened up the Bank of England to do exactly what the money changers do. They were going to professionalize this. Not only that, they were going to weaponize it. That's the thing that nobody really understands, is that the central banks are a weaponized currency printing monopoly institution, just like a corporation or the Society for Endowments and Arts, or a ball club or whatever. They're just a private gig that has a monopoly on printing currency in your countries. And they import it. They are not of any nation. They are above the governments. And the governments cannot tell them what to do. And if they disregard them as a legitimate institution by law in the country, then they will begin to euthanize and pull the puppet strings in the media and in the government buildings, and so on and so forth. I think most people are pretty familiar with how the usurpation of law and money institutions work in this world. It's kind of an ancient story. It's been going on for 10,000 years. And so that they are at the top of that. And the way it was weaponized was this. So I said that the money changers could print as much money as they want. And who's to know the difference? And let's say that I'm a popular money changer. And so what I do is I print money for elitists, for royal people, and so on and so forth. And so that the return of this fake money is guaranteed by the taxpayers because they have tax income. So I get richer and richer, I buy more and more, so I have more assets and wealth to back up, you know, any kind of fallbacks or pitfalls in this risky business of printing fake money. Not only that, I'm popular. So I'm wealthy, I'm popular. I have other changers, money changers, just like me, that are wanting in the business. And I know that if there's any pitfalls or so on and so forth, that I could get them to collude with me and temporarily back me up while I wrap everything up. And so basically what it is a Ponzi scheme. Okay. And the point of it is to roll it out big, roll it out fast, roll it out confidently, and so much that people just don't even question, right? Because it's just so much that people think that you're so serious and you're so powerful and influential that people don't doubt you, see the information about you and all of your assets that they know about. That information alone is currency, right? So the whole pyramid of the Ponzi scheme is depending on that information alone at some point in the process of this fiasco. And so you're rolling this out, you're getting your returns on investment on stuff that you didn't even make, and then you go immediately into buying properties, businesses, articles, everything, and then those are turning revenue, right? So you're transferring, basically it's Rumpelstiltskin's method method for getting rich quick. And this is no joke, to be honest with you. But it's his method of turning straw into gold. And then with the gold, you can go buy anything because you got the information now, right? So to speak. And so that's what they do. They turn the straw into not gold necessarily, but they do buy up all the gold and silver. But they turn the straw into the deeds on everything, you know, and then they're buying the influence around the royalty. They're getting into the royalty, right? So at a point, the Rothschilds mastered this in England, and they had brothers in Germany, France, Italy, and I believe that was it. Maybe in Belgium too, I forget. But they said that they don't even care who the king is. They don't care who rules the country because they control the money. And because they control the money, it doesn't matter. And here's the thing. They can knock markets down, okay, by pulling the money out. All they got to do is pull the money out, but they're already rich. And then all they have to do is write themselves some more money. And so when everybody's selling their businesses because they can't sell anything, right? I explained. You know, when money's tight, there's no money. You don't have any money supply. Then you can't sell anything, or you can't even buy anything because it becomes a barter situation. And there's no way you can find buyers for what people are trying to buy with, right? It becomes that pawn shop situation. You're turning everybody down. Everything freezes up. And so that's what they do. And so, you know, because they pulled the money supply away, they get you to freeze it up, then you have to sell out your business, your property, or whatever, because that's worth money, and they'll sure pay for it. Anybody would pay for that if they're rich. You know, these rock bottom prices are great, and whoever has the most money, or whoever can make up the most money, you know, they get to buy most of the businesses, most of the farms, everything, the deed on your children's lives, the royalty. They get to buy the monarchy. They can buy anything. And that's why they said they don't care who rules the country. They don't care who makes laws. They just control the money. And so then after they buy everything, guess what? Here comes the money. The money starts coming out. They start lending again, and it all starts happening again. And then they get this boom period. Okay, and then it's all worth, and then they're making profits on all these new businesses and properties and, you know, all these things that they bought for dirt cheap. They're selling at full price or more or whatever, and they're just making all kinds of money, and then they do it again, and they do it again. Not only that, they shove countries into wars. And in fact, for 56 years straight, before the Revolutionary War in the U.S. against them, England was in a war for 56 years with all of Europe, except for Hesse, Hesse, Prussia, and Germany are basically the same thing. Now it's just Germany now, and then you have all the other countries like Poland, Russia, all the way across the board. But they used to be an empire. Okay, so now they're all divided up. And the thing was that England was friends with Hesse, or Prussia, and Germany. So that comes into play later on when you get into the Nazis, you get into the Marxists, where Marxism comes from, the Frankfurt Institute of Marxist Studies. Okay. which is a whole nother ball added to this weaponized money. They don't just control the information in the money, in the currency, the liquidity information of economics. They also get into controlling the information of what people think about money and about each other and about their leaders and so on and so forth. And the reason why they get to doing that is because they can make more money on it. Right? So here's the thing. If they print money, who are the biggest borrowers of their money? Right? Remember, they're just lending out fake money and then get paid back real money. So who are the borrowers? Just anybody? Well, at first it was just anybody, but they really focused on the governments, the monarchies first, okay, and then they came over here. We don't have a monarchy, but they really focused on this. And so how could they get governments to borrow? Throw them into wars. So all of these wars, like I said, the 56 years of wars by England, when they came for the United States in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War in the United States, the Irish Genocide, the World War II and the Jewish Genocide. I mean, it goes on. The Russian Genocide, the Chinese Genocide. Now, in those cases, when they have these genocides, basically what they're doing is they're taking the property. First of all, they enslave the people. They take all of the crops that their lands make. They take all of the properties underneath them, and then they just kill everybody. So it's just you get free everything in the country, okay? Which basically explains a war, doesn't it? But instead of actually invading as a foreign country, they refit the nation to become their own government. You have to understand that the global central banks are ran by a kind of people which you think of as royalty, right? Kings and queens, that kind of thing, and all of their constituents. And so they're elitists. That's what we call them now. We don't call them royal any ninnies. They're elitists, right? Royal foil, whatever. But they don't have to be in your country. They can buy whoever in your country and then change the way law is made. They can buy whoever in your country and then change the narrative about your government. See? And then have a civil war, and then after the civil war, have their people put in charge. Okay? And that's what happened when they made the Marxist Institute. The Marxist Manifesto was created about the time of the Civil War. England occupied Ireland and took nearly all of the nation, all of its land, definitely all of its food, and starved the people, creating mass graves all over the place. There was something like 200,000 troops, British troops, occupying it over the duration of 5 years. And this was right around the Civil War. And the newspapers all said that these Irish people, they were all the drunks and poor people. They were scanty, bad people. But nobody ever talked about the actual genocide. See, that's how much they control things. And I bet you didn't know that the Federal Reserve Bank was just a private bank that imports money and holds the nation hostage like it does everybody else. So, you know, there's still people that think that socialism is a great method of conducting business. It's not. It's basically, it's the conviction of people's faith that their work is worth more than what their boss can sell the product of their worth for, right? So it's another one of those currency seizures, okay? And it's a religion. It's a religion based in economics. Now, who would think of something like that? Perhaps the richest people in the world? Yeah. The ones that know the value of mass paradigm information, the material information being exchanged, the currency of the people's business. When I say the people's business, it's anything that you do in your own household, between households, between businesses, between institutions, between nations, all the way down to the bottom floor of civilization. Okay? Where is it all based at? The ideology, what you believe, the spirit of each person, the combined spirit of populations. That's where it's at, and that's where they went. And they went there because they were so rich they could do it. They could research these things. They could afford it. And not only that, they were the masters of this. When you're so rich from printing fake money to buy everything and control governments for they were over 150 years in the business by then. I mean, these people were inheriting, right, this culture and this wealth, right? Then they went even further into the religions. Now, this is not new. This going into the religions is 10,000 years old. You know, there was a time when people decided, hey, you know, we're so rich, we're ahead. Why don't we make rules? And so when they started making rules, that's kind of like a religion. Now, I'm not saying that rules are bad, and I'm not saying that religions are all bad, but there are some that are only for the purpose of usurping people, which means just using you for their own needs, including the deeds on your lives, the deeds on your minds, your biological health, and these days they can get into your genes now, your genetics. Now it's become a science war. Okay, and it's worldwide. And it's actually scarier than what I'm letting on. But, so, when they created these economic faiths, they tried to get Europe to revolt against capitalism. See, capitalism was something that came from the United States. So Europeans went to the United States. They fended off these usurpers with their royal foil lies and their usurpation deeds on everybody's minds and soul. And they became extremely rich. And in fact, it's recorded that they were scared. The monarchies were scared. They said it was a threat to the monarchies of the entire world because the United States was becoming so rich that all of the smartest minds in the world would go to America and they would be left bankrupt. And it wasn't very long before there were no more monarchies in Europe. And so what's that mean? Basically what it means is that people said, hey, look, you know, I've got money, I've got businesses, you're a ridiculous fluke in some weirdo costume. I see Americans, I go to America, I read about America, I see pictures and examples of Americanistic behavior, and this royal foil stuff is just, it's not even realistic. Plus, Europe is Christian. And you have to understand what Christianity is. Christianity is the revolution against that exact thing, right? The continuation of Christianity is capitalism, right? Because after you've grown up a decent, hardworking person rather than a crooked, lying thief and murderer, what do? You create value because you see other people creating value because they've grown up like you. And when you create value, then you have things that you can trade, and therefore you can have prosperous life, right? It's the contract for a better existence, right? And so Christians pick up on this in Europe. They see that it worked in the United States. It was Christians that made the Constitution that fends against usurpers that come into government. They actually wrote the Constitution so that they couldn't make a central bank. The central bank in the United States is illegal, but we're in a war with them. They don't say it because they would have even more war problems. But the Constitution is, well, first of all, it's an anti-Christial. Not the Constitution is anti-Christial. The money printing Ponzi scheme that they have going on, okay, is an anti-Christial property. You just won't get that passed by wise, successful Christians. If Christians were starting a new nation and they were wise and everything, they would not pass that. And that was the case with the colonies that came together to form a federation together and a constitution to charter their protections from these kinds of things. Okay. But it was alive and well in Europe, and the advent of capitalism in full force spread to Europe, spread to Christian Europeans, spread to the businesses there that became capitalistic in full force. Wherever there's money is basically the way things go. And so away went the monarchies, but the central bank concept stuck. They're still in power over there. And they had to get into the United States. Oh, and also remember that Europe used to be just a scanty tribal hoobu-joobu gig, and it was Christianity that reformed people after the Dark Ages, right, and brought all of the economic prosperity out of the Dark Ages. All of the creative articles in Europe, the pride of Europeans is made by the Christian Europeans, and that's it, because you don't stop killing. Basically, you don't stop eating each other, right? And then start trying to work for each other, okay, until everybody becomes Christian. Not in the Dark Ages, anyway. And because basically to do otherwise is to step out of bounds, right? And so if everybody is, they're trying hard not to step out of bounds, and they're trying to stop other people from stepping out of bounds, then people want to work with each other, and therefore they're gonna trade more, because they make things of value rather than tear things down, loot things. Yes, there's criminals still, right? Because there's monarchies still. But the difference between what Europe was and the rest of the world was before Christianity took over the place and then after is enormous. The same thing could happen anywhere. It could happen in Africa. It could happen in Latin America. It could happen absolutely anywhere. and you will get the same effect. Europeans have what I've noticed in my experience. Europeans have a thing that there's this belief that it could only be Europeans that could succeed as successfully as has been succeeded in the world. And if it was not true, then why is it so at this point in time? And my answer is that the rest of the world hasn't been devotedly Christian like them, like us. While I'm European descendant, right? I'm white, and which is a good thing, not a bad thing. Okay, of course, but I'm Christian white. And I know I've done the studies and I've looked at everybody in the world, including everybody here now, tens of thousands of hours, and I've got out there and, rolled with the punches with the dirtiest of them, the hardest, avoided death many times. And so on and so forth. All right. The thing is, though, is I didn't stay in a sheltered life, where I pick and choose who's gonna get in my life, and everybody else is gonna stay out. No, I've been among every kind of people ever since I was a little kid. So, after so many years of passionate study and exploration, right, you see the patterns, and that's the case. That's the case. And again, it's the currency. It's the currency, right? So if you're passing off evil, you get zilch. You get nothing. And so then usurpers say, all right, these are all a bunch of nothings. I'm going to band them all up into bundles and use them for whatever. Wars or anything else. Slaves. Right? And it wasn't like they weren't still doing that in Europe, but they were doing more of it because of the central bank in the 1700s. Which probably wasn't a big change. I mean, if you look back in history, Rome was doing something similar. The Carthagins were doing something similar. The Huns and the Byzantines, all around China and Mongolia, the Persians, the Islamos, a lot of mayhem, a lot of slavery, a lot of bundles of warriors, bewitched, or offending themselves. They got to fend for themselves as well. Wasn't like they could just escape. But then, my point here is, I think it becomes kind of obvious the problem with the central bank. I call it the GBCE, the Global Central Bank Empire. And this is the biggest news in world history. World history. And it's not even anywhere in a history book yet. It's not anywhere in a class, college class, children's class. In fact, the closest you'll get to it is in a business class and in a you might get a little excerpt, a little detail in a history book about the wars with communists. They'll point at Nazis. They won't tell you about it being socialist, and if they do, it'll just be a one-liner. You'll hear about the central banks as being a legitimate part of business in your economics books. These are in the classes. You can find literature by authors you can buy outside of schools that will talk about these things. There's an old one that gets into it deeply by Cecil Rhodes called Hope and Tragedy. Hope and Tragedy. Hope and Tragedy. I believe that's what it's called. Hope and Tragedy. It's hope and something. And I believe it's got a watch on the pocket watch on the cover. It's kind of a simple looking book, but it is by Cecil Rhodes, and it goes into how the innards of this global orchestration functions. And so I think that's probably the oldest actual outline of these things, the thieves' things. But if you do your history and you put everything else together and you take all the quotes from different leaders and articles and even comic strips, political cartoons, and I'm talking about presidents, royalty, business leaders, journalists, common people, and you put everything together over the past several hundred years, you can see it come out quite clean and pristine. It's you can't miss it. I mean, and more people are becoming aware of it, and I've run across several of them online that are divulging what they've discovered about this. This is the biggest news in the world, and yet it's muffled up like in a communist country, and it's not just some data or anything. These people, this organization, they created their own religion, and it's all there's over 1 billion deaths. Over 1 billion deaths as a result of this thing. This is just... It's wild. It's the most wild thing there is. And you know how news is. Whatever's wild is the biggest news there is. So I don't see this thing becoming less and less known. I see this thing becoming more and more known. And it seems like more and more people are understanding some of the basic fundamental constructs of this thing. They aren't, and most people are not, the people that understand it are not as fully fundamentally aware of the entire history of the central bank wars. But they do understand a lot of the present functions and establishments and influences on everything in civilization around the world in this present era. But the history of it, once you learn the history of it, then you fully understand the magnitude of this beast. And I have never ever seen anything like this. Not in, astronomical science, not in anything in history, business, economics, technology, the 9 wonders or 7 wonders of the world. Nothing compares. So, and it should be a movie, right? It should be a movie, but I will tell you this, okay? It will be a movie. But I'll tell you this too. What people have to understand these days is that the dreams of the great dreamers are all possible, okay? But they have to stop being so selfish and so naive and foolish at the same time. And by that, I mean that if you come up with a solution, like let's say the solution for cancer, okay? Now there are trillions and trillions when in direct income from cancer. And there are trillions and trillions, perhaps quadrillions, from indirect income. Okay, because cancer is not solved, it's not cured. Okay, and it's not even assumed to be curable by most people, absolutely most doctors. Okay, and what happens is when people wind up finding the solutions and they actually outline the fundamental principles of what causes it and why it can break down, they wind up face down out in the woods with 2 bullets in the back of their head and claimed that they committed suicide. And there are many of these examples. Supposedly this happens in the area of alternate engines, where they burn down their buildings where they are working, they kill them. There's also things like the environmentalists claim that there's a climate warming problem, so we gotta kill everything, all the economical things, and anybody who says anything against it is automatically a sacrilegious demon. And it's a religion. There is no climate warming. There just isn't. I've looked at the data over and over and over. Trust me, I used to think that there was. I remember when I was a kid and I was in grade school, and I remember learning about the ozone and how there was a great big hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica. And I believe I remember something about Al Gore from them days, but not absolutely positive. But the thing is, though, is that later on it disappeared. But all the while they were talking about the chemistry inside of aerosol cans that had to be replaced. Styrofoam was killing the ozone. Exhaust was killing the ozone. And then where did the news about that go? It doesn't exist anymore. And it wasn't, I actually found out it wasn't just 20 years before that they were saying that the Ice Age was coming on. And then, back when I was a kid, they were saying that by now these coasts would be deep underwater because the polar caps would melt. Right? When in fact, the polar caps cannot melt. You can't melt the polar caps. It's impossible. It's physically impossible. And I forget all of the basic laws that govern that. And I will take a look at that again, the men's research that has that information. But not only that, here's the clincher. There is 0.038 0.038% of the entire atmosphere that is carbon dioxide. That's the big climate change enemy. Okay. So in percentage terms, what you do is you move the decimal over to the left 2 places. So in percentages term, there are 0.00038% carbon dioxide molecules in the atmosphere. And so if you doubled that, you would have 0.00074%. And I forget exactly what it would be if I put it into a fraction, but it's something like 1 over multiple thousand. Okay. Of a percent. right? So, and basically the saying is that if you double nothing, you still have nothing. Well, it's virtually nothing, right? It's just not there. So, but this whole global hoax, these global leaders and all these fools in the schools and everywhere in the world are up in arms about nothing. Is it the greatest hoax? Perhaps pretty close. But you got to understand that, when you change the currency of the people's business, then you create these big things like this. And somebody's making out huge. How many trillions of dollars have been usurped from the world? And Al Gore is saying, hey, we got to get this global treaty thing. It's got to be a treaty. And which means that Congress cannot do anything over it. It's higher than Congress. And I believe that you got to have like the majority of states say that it has to be repealed. And so it becomes very difficult. And the thing is, though, is it's also got to include $100 trillion. $100 trillion. So he's saying that this fib market, fib as in lie, this fib market is worth $100 trillion now. Total BS. And if you're a mayor or a governor and you're saying, hey, we're seeing climate change problems around here. It's just ordinary weather. Right? Because weather does weird things. Sometimes you have droughts. Sometimes you have colder spells. Sometimes you have warmer spells. Sometimes you have more rain. Sometimes you have less. And, but if you claim stuff, then you get to claim even more money. And if everybody's a fool, then you are popular. It's like you just walk in and say, yes, I believe it. And I'm a politician. So give me your votes. Give me your currency. Let's do something about nothing, right? And so it's just a big distraction. But I'll tell you what, it does, though. So you got to think about these central banks. They control it. They're the center of it. It's the main thing, okay? If you have to borrow tons of money, who do you borrow from? You borrow from the government, right? And who do the government borrow from? They borrow from the central banks, okay? Which means that we owe them more taxes. We didn't have an income tax until they came along. That's where our income taxes go, is to pay them. We pay interest on something that can never be paid off, right? So when we borrow from them, we actually have to borrow from them to pay the interest on what we borrowed from them. You understand? And the governments could just print the same stuff. It's like anything else. It's like salt. It's like nails. It's like bottles, food, wheels, shoes. It's money, okay? But we give it more value because of what it's worth to other people. We can get a lot of things for it. So that's where it gets its value, right? Right, that's how we estimate its worth. You wouldn't rip up money, but you wouldn't mind ripping up some receipts on what you bought with money, right? Because you can't go give anybody receipts unless, you can in some cases, and then you wouldn't dare rip up receipts. Okay, so you got to be able to see it to understand it. And I'm probably running on too long here, so let's get back to these markets real quick, and I'll do some trading and put up an example. Now, the U.S. Central Bank said yesterday that that they were going to reduce money supply. So what's that mean? When you reduce money supply, then the economy starts to seize up. Okay. Which means that business becomes more difficult. Now, I want to give you some hope, though, because we may be out of the dark ages. We may be exiting the dark ages. That's what I believe we are doing. Okay. And the reason why is because of technology. Now, these central bank goons never anticipated technology. And they still don't anticipate that they can be destroyed. And so we have computer technology. We've got internet. We've also got blockchain. But these aren't the only... these are the technologies that are going to tie them up. Kind of like the Goliath guy, or was it Goliath? No. Gulliver's Travels with the Lilliputians that tie down the giant. Okay, so that's us with the internet. And the thing is that whatever they do, it gets exposed to us now. And so, therefore, we don't believe them, right? It'd be like saying that, oh, my lies are worth so much. And then everybody looks online and finds out, no, they aren't. And so they can't use that fake money. That's fake currency to buy your approval and your trust. And once they burn your trust, they don't have anything. And in fact, everything they do from then on is worthless. And so the rich people that would invest money in them and donate to them will not do so because they know that the people know that's a fraud. Okay. So that's how this is going to work with the internet. And then you have blockchain, which is actually going to raise the world economy in so many ways. I can name a few. Basically, people in all of the third world countries can get on their smartphone. $25 smartphones coming soon. And they can invest in cryptocurrencies. They can also hold their land contracts and so forth on these things, and nobody in any government in the world can prove that they don't own the contract until another contract is made to prove that somebody else has taken over the deed. Also, they can transfer money for virtually no cost at all. And nobody can print fake money. It's just, that's the money. You can't get over the blockchain. So basically, all of the financial institutions, the lending institutions, the contract overseers, which are third parties, all these institutions are going to go out the door. All of the voting fraud in all of the countries are going to go out the door because of this blockchain technology on the internet. And the reason why it works is because you can't manipulate the globe's computers. You can't. How it works is basically these blockchains are on private anybody's computers around the world, and if you do something to manipulate the blockchain, which is the ledger. Remember I was talking about that gold vault ledger, right? They would just reduce somebody's account, and then they would increase somebody's account, but the gold all stayed the same. It's kind of like that. But the thing is, though, is that ledger is verified by the entire world. And so if you alter the ledger, it is automatically rejected from the rest of the ledgers in the world because it doesn't match the majority of ledgers. Now, the thing is that this is a democratic process. We all know what democracy means. We also know what the Electoral College means to republicanism. Now, you can have democracy, but it doesn't mean that everybody is included in democracy, right? So you know what democracy means, but then you can say that some people are worth being in the democracy and that others are not, and so on and so forth. So it's not always fair. And you can also cheat democracy. And you can rig polls. You can influence the people that are voting, et cetera, et cetera. Republicanism is that the people are the ones that govern themselves, and the governments are just another service, like any corporation, any ball club of entertainers, any society for the endowment of the arts or that kind of thing. That's all that they are. Okay, they are not us that fight our wars. Okay, to defend ourselves. They are not us that protect our citizens. Okay, they are simply servants. They are not royal foil, hoo boo 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 nonsense. Okay, they're just people. The thing is, though, is that when they create trouble and then they come in with solutions, then they get that regal kind of look. But people are becoming more and more educated now, and they realize that it's not quite so, and plus people are looking online and seeing if they have any lies, and therefore they can't hold that regal appearance, that value. So their tender of currency becomes worth less. Now, how does that apply to republicanism? Well, republicanism is about the people governing themselves, not about an elite saying that the people are their own, right? The people are not the elite's own, the sovereign. That's what they call them, because they're like their own state. Well, it's like us against them. And it shouldn't exactly be that way. And so a republican democracy is about all of the people able to put their input into what needs to be changed. Now, some people have strange wants, but when you boil it down to a big bulk majority and you kind of figure out what's actually necessary and what people should be doing on their own, right? So that they aren't forcing other people to be doing things for them, which they should be doing on their own, then you kind of get a consensus, a normal consensus, what you would call the norm. And if there's a big emergency, if it's a big enough emergency, then the consensus is going to reflect that. And they're going to consent who, based on what, should be changing laws and organizing accordingly. And then when the problem's over, then the need for that expert is over. And so we look on to other experts for other problems. So the Electoral College is a way of protecting this process of determination by the people, so that you can't just go to metros, brainwash everybody, and then pay them to rig and riot in order to get the votes all jacked up. You can jack these things up 25 million votes now, right? There's a lot of ways. You can open the borders and rush people in, and they're going to vote because they don't care about the country. They just want the money from it. These are strangers. They're just coming for the money. So if they all vote illegally for the free money from the taxpayers, they could win. But the thing is, though, is that the way that the Electoral College works is that the votes all totaled up in a certain area are worth equal to the votes in another area because they are reduced in power. And so, in a pure democracy, I could go to, let's say, LA, and I could rig the vote count. Let's say I have electronic voting and I hack it and I rig it so that 100% of the people vote for a certain whatever. Okay. And that many people actually defeats, in combination with the rest out there, defeats without a doubt the other side. Now, that would be pure democracy, but that doesn't work. In fact, I can vote twice as many people as there are in the state of California, okay? But you still don't have anything. Okay, so you won California, but you have to win in every other state as well. It's all equaled out. You can't just jack up one place and beat the whole thing. You have to jack up every single place. And so that becomes an extremely difficult and expensive and complicated program, which has not been achieved yet. But they are getting closer. Now, the blockchain defeats that in that the whole world of computers. Now, you have to understand that blockchain is very young right now. And right now on the blockchain network, just for one blockchain, which is the Bitcoin blockchain, there are 5 times the computing power of all of the supercomputers in the world combined. So this is already a supercomputer monster. And if you have a faulty, like I said, I could go to LA and I could fault the ledger. Well, if you have that kind of thing, then you don't actually get your faulty ledger accepted by the consensus ledger, the ledger's consensus. It's rejected. And to manipulate the entire world is impossible. And so that's how the electoral college of blockchain works, and you can use that with everything, not just voting, but money. Which, remember, I told you about the Ponzi process of printing money and money changers and stuff like that. Well, you can't do that anymore. You just can't. It's just impossible. And so these two things, the Internet of Truth and the blockchain of certain consensus, not only lifts the entire global economy for everybody, including in the third world, but it also takes away the wealth that these usurpers are taking from us with their lies. Okay, which is could be pretty shaky. I'm not really sure. Another thing is that in the third world, if you get onto a $25 smartphone and you start buying cryptocurrencies, those things tend to go up. And if you know how to trade those, then you can just make actual little profit on those. And so you can climb out of poverty. Another thing is, a lot of people don't, a lot of non-business minded people, perhaps, don't exactly understand the power of being able to get loans, invested in property, invested in businesses and so forth, inventions, and et cetera, and then make profits on that. But that matters in your country. And so if you're in, say, Africa or down here in Latin America, you need loans. Now, there's a risk factor involved. There's also the factor of micro lending, which has become popular these days. But there's still banks and everything and other, wasteful institutions, unnecessary institutions in this modern world that are taking in quite a bit for those loans to date.
There's crowdfunding on the internet where basically you propose that you will do this, such and such. And so then the crowds in the internet can donate to your cause, and they raise hundreds of millions of dollars that way sometimes, or anything in between. It can be any denomination, and for anything practically. But with the blockchain, you can do a distributed loan, and what that means is that essentially on the distributed loan, you got lots of people on their computers, on their smartphones, and so forth that will apply this much money to lending. Okay. And so if you distribute a loan of, say, $1,000 among 1,000 people, perhaps, and then each person does, let's say, 100 of those loans, well, the risk drops down to virtually zero because the likelihood of even most of them, or the likelihood of most of them not paying back the small loan is so small. And the thing is, though, is that if you don't pay back, the blockchain knows, right? So then what happens is that you go onto a ledger that says, okay, this person has borrowed this and this and this, and so their credit rating goes lower and lower and lower. And so we're not hung by these, crookedy credit rating agencies, which cost so much money. Or I don't know everything about them. I do know that there are hang-ups with them, but the blockchain becomes the credit rating agency. See, so, and the thing is, though, is that when you reduce risk down to virtually nothing for the lenders all around the world, okay, then all of a sudden it becomes extremely easy to borrow. And as long as as long as you can pay up, then you can continue to borrow and you can climb your way out of poverty. Now that's going to revolutionize these Latin countries and those African countries. That's going to revolutionize Asia and the Middle East. It's going to revolutionize the West, Europe, and North America. Okay, and then it's not just these rich institutions that are in it. It's everyday people. You could be a child and invest exactly like that. So, and if you're buying these cryptocurrencies, basically what's going to happen is you'll have a big run on one, and then probably somebody like China or something is going to try to take it over. And then all of that money that is in those will start coming out of the coin because it has been manipulated by hostile threats. So that money will go into other crypto coins. And plus, if you just had a big rally on one coin, right? Well, what are you going to do with your profits? You're going to take some profits off and put it into other coins. So if you're anybody, anywhere in the world, and you can see this happening, and you're telling people about it, and you're reading about it, and you're watching it on YouTube, and so on and so forth, well, then you automatically know if they had a big boost on these ones over here, they got a lot of profits. Now, where's that money going to go? It's going to go on these other ones. So what are you going to do if you're poor? You're going to buy some of these cheap coins, and then you're going to see a little influx. And, I'll tell you what, who I'm talking to right now more than likely wouldn't understand. But, to have a $5 bill just given to you out of thin air, that $5 bill is something like finding $100 or even $1,000 bill, okay, to you. But to most folks in the world, something like 5 billion folks, $5 or $20 just out of the sky. Do you understand? Did you ever watch the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy? You know, the supposedly about the man wandering the plains of Africa, and then a Coke bottle fell out of the sky. He had no idea, anything about Coca-Cola or bottles or anything. So, very surprising, very big deal. And that's going to be big news. That's going to be like the biggest news. So, and you can't control the blockchain. You can't. As soon as it becomes well known that it's becoming taken over by some hostile cult, right? That's your usurpation authorities, or anybody else. It doesn't have to be, they don't have to say they're the authorities. They can say that they're just a mob or terrorist organization or whatever. But basically just pirates trying to be governments and trying to be centralized controllers, As soon as that happens, then all these computer hackers and computer programmers from all these institutions, they're gonna say, what? You can't do that to people. And they're gonna quit their jobs and they're gonna go make something that gets around it, skirts the whole thing, and then everybody's just gonna use that, and that's just gonna be how it is over and over. It's a whole world of these opportunities, and if you can skirt all that, and then everybody's getting served, not only are you a hero, okay, which is quite a hefty payment, okay, but also, you could probably make a lot of money in the process. That's how these things work. You get rich doing it. You get rich for saving the world, right? Rather than usurping the world, save the world. Work with the world. Do for the world. And that's the whole message of the Christian Revolution, right? The Judeo-Christian Revolution, the Constitution, right? And it proves it right here on this technology. Imagine the technology solving a lot of these problems with these megalithic, megalomaniac usurpers, these pirates of the information, the sociological tender of the people's business. Imagine it, taking that problem of falsification and usurpation and leveling the playing field, right? And so they're going to lose a ton of money. Because why? Because they will fight it. And the more they fight, the more fuel they throw on themselves, right? And the more fuel they throw on themselves, obviously they're on fire more, which is a big sign that these are the crooks, right? So they just give themselves away. So the best thing they can do is just stay quiet, go with the flow, and nobody will ever know the difference. They'll have less wealth, right? They will. They won't be able to control and dictate, but they can keep some. But as soon as they start to fight, it's not like the old days. When you could change everything, lie, create false flags, and then get away with it for centuries before anybody found out. And the only time that they found out was because of the internet. There's so many aspects to stuff, and I wanted to get to the point about the fact that easy information. This is the era of easy information and technology and science. Okay, so science leads to technology. Technology leads to easy information, right? So you can transfer money instantly around the world. That's easy information. Based on technology, you can share information You can educate yourself easily online, easy information. You can get into business or any kind of trade, anything you want. You're just never going to be jobless. And the thing is, though, is that an economy works like a tub, and it needs money supply, okay, in order to stay liquid. And so you fill the tub up to close to the edge, and if you overfill it, then you get inflation. And they overfill it in order to catch the taxes. I won't get into it now, but basically, inflation decreases the buying power on everything, so the value of everything decreases. But they take that value away with taxes and regulation. And then they feed the central banks. And so it would be kind of like overflowing the tub and then having buckets, right, catching the overflow, okay? And so eventually what happens is, after so many years, you've got an overflowing tub, or overflowing tubs, because there's more than one national economy, and the whole floor is flooded. And so eventually what happens is, see, the global central bank empire and all of its tentacles, right, they control, which is a lot to do with the media, which is the fourth branch of government. They say the fourth estate, it's virtually so. And the governments, the local and the national governments, the global institutions, the corporations, the education, the religions, they get into the religions. It goes on and on and on. But basically, and definitely the money. But basically, as the water overflows the tubs, the floor starts to flood. And then when the flood comes up over the top of the tubs, they have the whole world. They can do whatever. And you got to remember, they've killed over 1 billion people now. So this isn't kiddie games. These are worse than the bubonic plague. Okay. If you know anything about history, you know what's out there. And if you know anything about independent news, you know what's just outside those borders. Or what's inside your borders. Right? It ain't going to come out on MSM. It's not, there's not a big welcome wagon out there in the streets or whatever. So, advertising it or whatever. But the thing is, though, is that all of the importance is on the currency, the money supply. And that's why the stock markets, the bond markets, and the precious metal markets, the commodities, the futures, the Forex, all of these Wall Street industrial business people, right, they come to a halt right around the time that the big central banks make their money supply decisions. Janet Yellen made one. The ECB, not long ago. Japan, China, right? But the real big ones are the ECB and the US, okay? Now, the bigger they are, the more influence they have on the markets. And so the thing is, though, is that's how important that the money supply is. That's how important that the value of this liquid currency is. Most of all, the one that makes the dollar, the US dollar, which is the reserve currency, which most trade in the world is done by. Okay, more than gold or anything else, more than oil. All the oil's done in the dollar, etc. And there are some logistical reasons for that, military reasons. But the trust in it is becoming less and less and less. And I'm looking at, in fact, on a side note here, I'm looking at the independent news pundits that watch all these things. And I've never seen them unanimous at the same time, all of a sudden, about anything like they have been this week. Multiple productions, articles, or pundit shows, however you put it online, about the stock market crash. The dollar was last week, it was the dollar. Just all of a sudden, just out of the blue, all of them are very unanimous about this. The dollar crashing, the stock market crashing, economy upturning, all of a sudden, just, it's very bizarre. I've never seen them unanimous like this. And, but we expect it. We expect it because we know what the global central bank empire does. We know what they are doing. We understand the economics involved with their money monopoly. We know it's designed to destroy itself and thus destroy us. That way they can take whatever they want, right? Genocides, right? They get all the property. They get all the say-so. They get to make history however they want it to be made. Even the genes. They can make the genes however they want them to be made now. They want to reduce the world population by 95%. They want all kinds of stuff. The UN is the big enemy. Okay. So basically that tells you, all of these things right here are telling you what kind of importance is on that fiat currency that they are manufacturing. Okay? It messes with the whole world. But, is it the only tender in the whole world? Right? I discussed the truth of the internet, the consensus verification technology of the internet. The blockchain is going to be the internet 2.0. It will be, you watch. And, but that's not all. So, excuse me. If I pay you money for a car, right, that required so many people to design it, so many people to put it together, so many people to extract the materials from around the world for the people to shape, put it together, transport, and then sell, and then I pay you a price that's justifiable based on all those things. Okay, makes a lot of sense though, right? Now, what if it becomes infinitely easier to extract all those materials, to design all those parts, to put all those parts together, and to transport that device? What then? See, in business, we call that leverage. Leverage, right? So, how does leverage work? If I take a baseball bat, okay, and I pry it underneath a car, it's a low-sitting car, and I pry it under there, it's not going to do me much good. I might rock the car a little bit, okay? And if I take an anvil and I set the anvil next to the car and I put the bat underneath the car again and I try to lever it up, okay, and it still does about the same. But if I take, let's say, a 20-foot steel bar and it's as straight as an arrow, okay, and it's on top of that anvil, but let's say the anvil's bigger. Let's put something else there. Let's put, I don't know, maybe something as solid as stone, about the size of a washing machine, next to the car, okay, and a little bit distance, a little bit of distance, and then put that 20-foot rod, beam, whatever, put it under there, and now I could lift the car. A child could lift the car. Okay. So that's the mechanical advantage of leverage. And we use that a lot in contracting and machine shops and manufacturing. Okay. And in the business world, it would be something like borrowing. So if I can borrow, then I can lift the purchase of something. So let's say I've got $100, but I need $100,000 to buy an article. Well, then that $999,000 is the leverage, right? So that's from the baseball bat to the beam. Okay, and so on Wall Street, it's just rudimentary that the brokers or brokerages give the retail traders, any trader on your platform online, 2 times to 4 times margin, which is your leverage. Okay, and the reason why it's so low is because there's a law on it. They used to give you 10 to hundreds of times until there became a law against it, because they would be paid no matter what. And you could, anybody who doesn't know about trading sees this, they think, wow, what a great deal. Then they use it, and then they lose every penny they've got. And it goes straight into the market, and the professionals get the money. The brokerages get everything, plus a little interest. They don't lose anything. It's your money. And so that was that. And they could get your farm or whatever you got. So you got to have collateral to get it. And then once you do it and you mess up, then they get whatever you got for cheap. And they work this business anyway, so they're pretty well off. You got to understand there are people with stores of money with not much to do. So what they do is they go out there and they facilitate markets, all kinds of markets. They could be distributors, and all they're doing is calling manufacturers around the world, striking deals with them. They're calling retailers around the world. They're talking to distributors that transport this stuff, and all they're doing is wheeling, dealing, making deals between these companies, these businesses, and striking the best deals that they can, trying to gain credibility and status to get better deals, developing reputations, and all they're doing is employing their money. Now, what they're really doing is they're facilitating the liquidity that these businesses need. So they're not enemies of the state, okay? I think a lot of people have thought that is the case ever since Marxism came around and became very popular. They're not enemies of the state. They're capitalists. Just like the business owners that employ people, they're employing their money to facilitate those business owners' dealings in a faster way. But they don't have the leverage. But these people do. And when they institute their leverage into the system, they risk losing their leverage. So say they purchase at prices too high, then they can't even sell it for more. So they got to sell it for less. Let's say something happens to the purchase during transportation. Then they lose everything they invested in it. Okay. So they've got to play savvy. They have to play with financial strategies in order that they don't lose everything all at once. They got to be careful, just like you got to be careful if you're an arborist and you're swinging bus-sized branches over people's houses and power lines and their necks. Okay, you got to be careful when you're out there on the seas with pirates and storms, making sure that you've got a way to get from port to port without sinking or getting stranded, right? Everything is risky, right? So these are just workers, but Remember, the monarchs and the central banks, they became the central banks. They don't like capitalism, right? Because if people are making money, then they don't need these idiots. You understand? So they are enemies. And the Frankfurt Institute, where socialism, socialism was actually devised by Marx himself. So socialism and communism was. But cultural Marxism was devised. All these things were further devised in the Frankfurt Institute, but Marx was working with the London hegemony, the royals and the central bankers there in London. Okay. Anyway, so about the capital being okay. So now time is leverage. So if it used to take you a long time to get something transported, or it used to take a long time to get funds to and from these all the bases on the field out there in the business world and in the private world, right? Transferring money around the world or from neighborhood to neighborhood, then if it takes a long time, well, that's worth money, right? That your time is money. So if it takes less time, then you can do more of it. See, if I can buy more shares and then these shares profit, then I get more profit. If I can buy more of the maker's stuff, right, then I get a lower price, and therefore I get a better deal. And also I can offer a better deal to the retailers, right? So then I make more money, right? So I split the difference up, but the thing is, though, is if I can buy lower, I'm going to make more. And also I have more room to make a better deal with the retailers, right? Because if somebody else is selling for higher, but I'm selling for lower, then I have less risk, which means that I'm more assured of making money faster. So this becomes an exponential thing. So if I'm saving all the time, all throughout my life of these things, even as a person that is just a private person, okay, I'm getting more stuff done. I'm developing more things. I have more time to research. That's leverage. All of these technological accesses to work, robotic work, computer work, distribution, information distribution, okay, information transference, instant transference, all this stuff. Don't forget the sciences in all this, right? That's where the technologies come from. That's what the information is often about. Okay, all of this stuff is leverage. And so what this is doing is it's taking over the power or the importance of the fiat currency, right? Remember, the fiat currency is the tender of the people's business, right? It's just information. I kind of explained that at the beginning. The technology, right? Replace whatever that fiat currency was doing for you. The information on there was doing for people. It was doing something for people. And then it represents something. It gets something. It gets the stores of knowledge. It gets the skills and the talents to come work for you. It gets the materials and the assets. Right? But if technology can give you this, okay, then technology becomes the currency. And the leverage in technology replaces the importance of the fiat currency. Okay. And therefore, the central banks are not so important after all. And so instead of them holding us by the throat over a cliff, where they have done this many, many times to the world over and over, all around it, and they drop us, or they hold us, and they threaten to drop us unless we oblige them. Okay? Now, all of a sudden, from the bottom, the technology is building up, so the drop is not so far, right? Because now they don't hold all of the leverage. They don't have control over all of the leverage. The technology is replacing their leverage, right? And so you have that is a conflict. That is two kinds of leverage, right? So if you have two businesses in a market and there was just one, okay, and they had all of the market share, but then another one comes in and then they have half of the market share, okay? So now you have the computerized robot taking over the market. Now, people say, well, it's taking over the jobs, but at the same time, it's taking over their importance. Okay. So now they're sharing the market with these, and the more that they push against it, the more that they light themselves on fire. They douse themselves in more fuel, giving themselves more bad attention, and therefore it gets faster and bigger and broader, like glacier, like a running glacier, to smother them. And so they have to play carefully and quietly. Everybody knows who the Bilderbergers are. That Bilderberg meeting, the Trilateral Commission, Skull and Crossbones, the Masons. Okay? Everybody knows about all of them. So they're running out of room. They're getting pushed off the edge of the world, so to speak. But that's what I wanted to point out for you. It's what we do on the internet. Excuse me. All right. Well, anyway. So what do we got here? We've got, looks like we're forming a support. Okay. Looks like this is failing a tad bit. We're running back down into the red area on the MACD. We've got, let's see here. How far are we to close here? Let's see if I can get this to pop open. Okay. So basically we popped up over the money line, as I call it. That's the 34 exponential moving average. And looks like we're about to fall back down. I got to tell you that the gold should be negatively affected by deflation. Okay. So when they pull out money supply, technically there's less risk. Although look at this. So here in the early morning, looks like they bought up. They also covered their shorts perhaps. So there was perhaps a short squeeze. And then in the after hours, straight away, this fell off. But it was about, oh, no. Right about right here. This is where, no, right here was where the announcement was. So when the Fed spoke, this was it right here. She said, Yellen said that they're going to raise 25%. So this was already falling off. So perhaps somebody had some information, or they just knew that this would be the best place to sell. But as you can see here, there was a ton of buying as well, which got beat by the bears. So then, of course, they sell off. Now, the reason why they sell off is because when they add more fiat phony paper to the economy, gold goes up because the inflation is a risk. Okay. So that because, well, basically the paper becomes worth less, and in order to hedge against the inflation, which is decreases the value of the paper money, you invest in gold. And then because the world invests in gold like that, you also buy gold because it's going to raise in price. So it's a good investment. All right, but when they reduce that money supply, okay, and they raise interest rates again, okay, then that means that the gold is going to come back in, and so that's where this is from. So it looked like they thought that maybe they wouldn't raise, the Fed wouldn't raise, so they bought, and then they rose, they lifted the rate, and they sold off. And so you get the declines here. Let's see here, 1266, 1254. Not many dollars. Although it's over, anything over 1% is usually large in the markets. And it says here, down 1.60%, or $20 from the close yesterday. Actually, $20 from the close yesterday. That's quite a bit. So I'm thinking that this is going to meet weakness here. But I'm not too interested. It doesn't really seem like there's going to be a lot of rock and roll here. So, and this recording is getting kind of long. So I might just draw out some trades, and then tomorrow I'll go over the strategies again. Well, there's not so much information on this thing, and I'll focus more on the actual strategies. And the strategies are about, funding the focus trade. You've got a focus trade, and then you've got a counter trade that funds any kind of losses on the focus trade. And also you work in the focus trade so that you can get in at better prices. Okay. And so basically it's a strategy so that you're not losing money, and in the process of strategically defending yourself from any losses on your trade, you wind up profiting more than you would even lose in the first place. Okay, so basically, the two sides of the trading on any one of these markets in your day trading, we're day trading just one market at a time. Excuse me. The two sides become profitable engines. Okay, to increase your capital supply. Now, as you increase your capital supply, then you're able to diversify into other markets, into other strategies in your portfolio. Right. Until then, though, this is how you start. You start with a prop firm, okay, prop fund, prop firm. They test you. If you can trade, they fund you. Okay, and then you climb up. You can climb up on them, right? You can use their leverage. Now they take a little cut, but it's better than nothing, and you're not even risking your own money, right? All you need to do is educate yourself and you can get out. Looks about the same as the gold right here. It's kind of testing lower, perhaps. Really slow moving. That's only 10 ticks. You know, if this was trending up, basically what you would see here is you would see this would be support and it would be testing that, right? But now we're back down to here. It may work. It looks really boring though. So for the purpose of this class, it's kind of boring. And we've got the euro on the 6E. Same thing. And the euro is usually boring about this time of day. Looks like it could be falling off there. Yeah, so basically what's happened here is that this thing has bounced on this line, okay, and then it tried to get through resistance, but it bounced on resistance, and now it's broken through support, so more than likely it's going to fall off there, okay. And you know, I'll tell you something. If this is the first time you ever seen how this is done, how this is analyzed and then taken to task, you know, where you would start to invest strategically. Okay, so it's two parts, right? We're going to analyze, we're going to take a stance, and then we're going to strategically start to invest ourselves. So how I determine the stance that I'm going to take is done based on these components here. Now, we've got the MACD has turned on down. Notice that price stayed, you know, level here, but MACD got lower. That's a negative divergence. Notice that the MACD is turning red down here, so the sellers are dominating buyers now. Notice that the trend here is all below both the VWAP, which is this purple line. It's also below the e-money line all the time. It tests higher. There's nothing up there. Nobody's interested today. And based on the independent news, you wouldn't know so much about it on the mainstream news, although some of them poke in and say, but based on the independent news, this is kind of what you would expect. Market's down 1% from yesterday, and it was down something like... Was it down at all? Well, it's not doing too bad. I would say that it's kind of meandering or poking around. As you can see, it's coming down through. So now, you know, to continue my lesson here, this is going to bounce off of this at some point. So once the trend begins lower, it'll flow through, take some profits, bounce off this, go lower. Probably the next level of resistance. So when it comes down here, it'll probably bounce somewhere around here. Bounce somewhere around here, bounce off that, and then go lower. Or it might just hang out in a range. Okay, so, it can either range, it can rock straight through everything, right? And then it would start to take this thing that I'm explaining here, where it finds levels, it finds support, it finds resistance, and or it reverses, right? So, and you've got to take a stance. Now, you can be wrong on the stance, which means that you've got to work. You got to work on your defense against being wrong. And also, in the process of analysis or diagnostics, basically the crowd, which is who's managing all these prices, okay. Generally, the crowd is using these lows and highs as their street signs. Okay. Sometimes the VWAP. Okay. Obviously, nobody's getting paid anything special to buy stocks right now or equities. Below VWAP here, nobody's getting any bonuses for that. Okay. And perhaps they're getting bonuses for selling below VWAP, but definitely not, getting bonuses for selling above VWAP, but they can't get above VWAP anyway, so there's not really any hard selling. But definitely nobody's getting big bonuses for buying below VWAP. Or maybe that might have happened right here. There's a lot of volume right there. Okay. So, but yeah, as far as the crowd signals, okay, these are the kinds of things that we look at. We also look at on the daily here. Okay. Daily chart. And basically we do the same thing. So now we're down to a level right here. This will be a kind of a road sign. It's kind of like a reef, If you're a fish out in the ocean, you're swimming around, oh, there's a reef. Well, where's everything else at? At the reef. So you go to the reef. Kind of like that. And then we figure out, okay, well, what's it going to do? What's happening here at these lows and highs and so forth, and then we move on, and then we look for another exactly the same thing, and then we figure out what's happening there, and so that's how we communicate to each other. Okay, and most of the time, the crowd doesn't like ambiguity; they like certainty, and because it's worth more money. And ambiguity is risky. It can be one thing, it can be another thing. There's nothing to base anything on, so they'll get out of the market. Once they get out of the market, the computers take over because they become the majority. Then it becomes very schizophrenic. It's very radical. Extreme one way, extreme the other way. It reads signs. Actually, I don't think the computers read the signs very much. They read other things. So where a trader gets lost in this is they're still there. They don't know that the crowd has left, and they're reading the signs, but the computers are not obeying the signs. And so then when they get involved, when they participate in the market, the computers are designed to then just rip them off. Right? So it becomes kind of like the psychopathic Terminator driving the bus and trying to wreck into the intersections and oncoming traffic and over the bridges because the Terminator can't be killed, right? Terminator makes money no matter what, right? And the only way we can actually get the Terminator under control is when the crowd comes in and then we hold basically hold the Terminators down to, what we're doing, which is when the crowd starts to obey these signs, right? So then the Terminators are justified in their actions according to how the crowd is moving volume and everything else that adjusts their algorithms. And so they basically they just mimic what we're doing. But as soon as there's not enough of us, they mimic nothing. And it becomes very chaotic. Okay, so you got to know, that's going to happen around the holidays when the crowd's out. That happens in the latter half of the of Fridays, before the central banks, the big central banks, they come out and they say, we're going to play with your money this way or that. And so that's how that works. So there's your lesson for today, and good luck.